So this is the closing panel. The theme of the closing panel is what's next, transitioning to the new normal with resilient structures and sustainable practices. Donc, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je vous invite, si vous ne l'avez pas déjà fait, à choisir votre langue. Donc, bienvenue à
So welcome all. Please select your language. This closing panel is on the important theme, what's next, transitioning to the new normal with resilient structures and sustainable practices. This session is about the fair succession planning following the pandemic. So right away, I'll invite our moderator to join us. Our moderator for this session is Eddie Perez. Eddie is
Donc, Eddie, la parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup, Andréane.
Thank you, Andréane. Thank you to the organizers of Spur Change. I've been taking part in a few workshops, and I'm always impressed by the discussion level taking place here.
Within Climate Action Network Canada. I think, we can't begin this panel without taking a step back and reflecting on the year that it has been. 12 months of uncertainty, more than 20,000 deaths in Canada, the losses, the learning, and the questioning. I've been invited today to speak about a very important discussion on the transition, on what's ahead of us. And we know that COVID has shed light on weaknesses within our society, and perhaps most essentially systemic weaknesses. So, we kind of ask, what's next? Maybe to give you a bit of a global overview. Early in February, the Greenness of a Stimulus Index from Vivid Economics came and was published with an overview of what G20 countries were doing when it comes to COVID-19 responses. It was an assessment that showed the power of major economies when it comes to recovery packages on climate action and biodiversity. And the first conclusion that came out of that was that G20 governments were pumping approximately $4.6 trillion directly into sectors that have a large and lasting impact on carbon emissions and nature. But only about 1.8 trillion of those investments were actually green. And the other part of that report actually showed that when it comes to nature and biodiversity, of the total quantified green stimulus, only about what is considered green, so about 680 billion, only about 100 billion of it, from the 4.6 trillion that I just mentioned, was aiming to improving biodiversity and preserving ecosystems. So I just gave you a couple of numbers. This is just the quantity aspect of this discussion. But as we look and think about the transition, three things come to my mind, which I want to bring into this discussion. The first one is responding with urgency. The second one is how to build resilience across all systems. And the third one is acknowledging that there are winners and losers, and that we must come together in a spirit and solidarity to reduce different, emerging, and amplified forms of inequality. So in that sense, the journey is as important as the end goal. So how do we make it happen collectively? We have a great group of panelists today to discuss about the role of individuals and organizations and societies to strengthen those weak points and build a more sustainable future for all. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Myriam Nobret, Myriam Nebré est une activiste qui travaille avec la SOF, Sempre Viva.
working with Sempre Viva Organização Feminista in Brazil. Yogesh Gore
University. And we're also going to watch a video from Rima Nanavati, who is the director of Self-Employed Women's Association. Myriam, la parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for being with me this evening. You can imagine that for us in Brazil, we want to talk about the future because the current situation is quite complicated, and we want to put all of our energies to get out of this nightmare in which we find ourselves at present. When we talk of a transition towards a new normal, in quotation marks, I would like to emphasize the quotation marks because we know what the old normal brought us to the situation we find ourselves in currently, and we don't want to go back to that old normal. I'd like to put quotation marks about the word balance, the because we need to find a different type of economy. And for that, we need to recognize that the visible part of the economy, the one that is being measured by the um, market economy, depends on nature and on care. The productivity of the people that is realized mainly by women at home and in the local communities. This is what for us is essential to support life and the social reproduction of life, nature and the care for the others. A pandemic has also disclosed the level of destruction of nature and the class, race, and gender inequalities all over the planet, but maybe because it hits everybody, but it is an observation that the peoples who have their territories and their ways of living assaulted. So what they are teaching us is that there is no way to repair this system. We need a structural change. For instance, if we are talking of alternative energies, if we want of wind, energy, for instance, we need to see how the very fast increase of the wind energy has impacted the lives of the aboriginals in the Amazon who have seen their territories destroyed to extract the wood that was used to build the wind turbines. So we need to see if we need energy for what purpose, and maybe we can imagine different ways of providing energy in a more decentralized manner, and that would provide people more power over their sources of energy. So based on these principles, I'd like to speak about the transition and open a few pathways for reflection about the transition here in Brazil. The first point is that we are recognizing that the Black people here in Brazil and also the indigenous people have a very rich experience of resistance and of existence. That's why we are talking of resistance existence in a single word, because both go together for the Black people and the indigenous people here. For centuries, they have experienced a state of permanent crisis. So in order to exist, they need to resist. And in the context of this resistance, there is community life where women play a central role. And we need to recognize all the knowledge that comes from that, but also the wounds that this process of slavery and of destruction of livelihood have caused to the people. And in this sense, this invites us to a very strong commitment to be in solidarity with those people, to provide better conditions, to recognize their rights on their ancestral territories, and even on the territories that are in the cities under the asphalt. Another important idea for us is the idea of politicizing solidarity in order to put solidarity at the core of politics, meaning that the political task that is urgent and primordial is to respond to the basic needs in terms of food, of housing, of tenderness and listening. And that's what the social movements are trying to do and are strongly committed to. And for women, it's also very important the idea of care. And so, whom are we taking care of? Whom are we caring for? Because we see that the women who are uh, leaders at the basic level need to develop processes, uh, collective and political processes to support one another. Another idea is that, in our opinion, as humankind, we are in such a complex situation that to go through that moment, we need to develop a new knowledge, building this knowledge, but how? In a communal way, based on the commons, as they say in English. We cannot leave the whole responsibility to transnational corporations, like challenging the vaccine copyrights, but we have to think also of a healthier food, medicinal plants to counter the industrial food industry. So the current situation is so complex that there is not one solution and no quick solution for that. We really need to wage on the people to improve their food, and we should be concerned about the kind of technological situations that are promising an easy solution that would be controlled by the large transnational corporations. And to conclude, we are convinced that we should develop knowledge together. And for that, we need a process that will reinforce the collective political subject. And I think that women and feminists have a lot to contribute because of the long experience we have about organizing ourselves, because we're always taking very seriously the concrete issues in life, the horizontal dimension. And what I mean to say here is that we cannot separate the narrative, the agendas, or the transition programs and take them as pure ideas disconnected from the political subjects. We cannot imagine that the transition would be in a book, for instance. No, I mean that building a transition project based on the political subjects that will place women, the Black people, and the Indigenous people at the center, people who have been going through crisis after crisis and have developed resilience, as you say. Well, they are all part of a same process. Those were the ideas that I wanted to share with you in this
Merci beaucoup,
panel.
William.
Thank
Extrêmement
you,
enrichissant.
Pam. Thank you, Miriam. Extremely
J'aimerais
enriching. And
en faisant peut-être une idée générale
if
sur les
I
éléments de la
can
résistance
focus on
et,
this
et
idea
comment
of
représenter
resistance
les
and
peuples
the
dans
other
l'histoire
important
des communautés
dimension is the identity of the peoples who are living this transition, that who should be at the core of the transition process, the which people should be placed at the core of the transition and of the knowledge that is necessary for that.
To come in and maybe um, put forward ideas on the way forward, on the transition towards a much more resilient future. Jogesh.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you for having me share some reflections in this panel. We already started talking about you as well as Miriam about indigenous people. So let me first start by acknowledging that right now I'm calling you from San Francisco Xavier University, which is situated in Mi'kmaqui, which is a unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. You already started, Eddie, and also Miriam touched upon the fault lines in the system, and why we are talking about a new normal, because the old normal was not normal, and the kind of inequalities it had, be it gender, income, racial, all sorts of. So I'm not going to talk about that, but rather look at the way forward, whether you call it a reset or a new normal or building back better or building ahead. I would essentially, whatever reflections I'm sharing is our conversation with our graduates who are located in over 130 countries, around 8,000 of them. And it's been a year. We did not have any participant come to our campus to attend our program. So most of our interactions have been online through webinars. And also these are mostly what we are hearing from them about the problems because of the pandemic, but most importantly, I think some of the stories of resilience and entrepreneurship that we are hearing, and that should help us creating that new normal. So I would focus on three things, and some of that actually Miriam touched upon. Number one is the role of women and women agency in this pandemic. If we really look at that, and if I pick up an example, for example, in India, when the lockdown was announced early March, there were millions of people who were working in the urban areas for their livelihoods, and because of the lockdown, everything was shut down, and they had to take a walk back to their villages. And when they went back to their villages, who was actually that took care of them? It was actually the women who took care of them, and not only at the household level, but at the community level, be it providing food to the people who couldn't have access to food, taking care of the elderly, making sure that the children who used to get one meal in the school, and because the schools were closed, making sure that those children at least had one meal a day. So ensuring that. So women, I think we talk a lot about that they were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, but also this also a fact that they were the most who responded to the pandemic. And one of the stories that we hear across the globe is that the increase in gender-based violence caused by the pandemic. But what we are also finding out through our partner is that even in the time of the pandemic, when there was an increase in gender-based violence, what did help women? What helped women overcome those incidences of violence, be it in a public place or a private place? And what we found was it was the opportunity to work. They found peace in work. Work was a healer for them. So the women who were able to actually find work opportunities were able to deal with the violence both at home and at outside. In many incidences, we found that women were the first one to go and find work and to sustain the livelihood of the family. So I think the role of the woman is very, very crucial in that new normal, building back better, and more opportunities for women to take ownership of the household livelihoods, enterprises. More opportunities must be created for them. This is what we are finding out. The other area is around, digital technology is probably the main driver of change now. And and there are positives of the digital technologies in terms of the opportunities it offers to leapfrog in certain areas of the economy. But we also know that there is trouble with the digital economy. Now, some of the positives that we have come across the board is the digital technology enables a big breakthrough, for example, in electronic payment. In many countries, we have found out that countries where access to finance was a huge challenge, now there is universal access to online banking. That's a huge jump. I mean, just to give you an example, in countries like Kenya, India, where there are more than 400 million bank accounts now, where people can access. That's a huge leap with the technology. We have seen the use of technology in increased telehealth, distance education, e-governance. So a lot of the transfers during the pandemic were happened because direct payment to the beneficiaries. So there's a lot that technology can offer in terms of creating that new normal. But we also know that there is a digital divide. Not everybody has access to the same technology, and if we don't pay attention to that, then it can further increase the inequalities. And that's where I think some of the work, some of the innovation can happen in enabling that access to that technology. And I really would like to mention a couple of examples where Global Affairs Canada, as well as their programs like the FIT program, where we are one of the grantees, and some of the things we are piloting in countries like Kenya and India, where we are actually looking at access to technology and digital inclusion. So what will enable a woman farmer, for example, realize her full potential? How she can access the power of technology to become a successful agri entrepreneur? So that kind of help from programs are really helpful in sort of knowing more how we can help her realize that potential. And the third area I would say, and then I will actually would like you to hear from one of our partners, Rima Ben, who will talk about 4 minutes about like some of the practical examples. So third area is around the investments that we must make in building social and human capital. So what we found out during the pandemic, that ultimately the early responders where personal relationships, trust, community connections, they came in as first responders to when it came to taking care of the most affected, producing masks, making sure that there is access to water and food. So this was enabled in many cases. We found out from our partners that people had almost forgotten the kind of social capital existed in the community. So in a time of crisis like the pandemic, they have rediscovered the social capital and the bonding that existed. So how we actually can support that, be it formal or informal institutions, to carry forward some of that social capital, and what are those community institutions that we can further build in. And again, here I would say that some of the work that Global Affairs Canada is helping us do in countries like Bangladesh, Haiti, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and India, is to work with those community level organizations, those community structures, invest in their capacity, because they are the ones who proved most resilient. So how we can actually support and build their capacity. So one of such examples, I will like you to hear from one of Cody's long-term partner, the Self-Employed Women's Association. They are also currently partnering with us in two of the projects funded by Global Affairs Canada. And SEWA is a member-based organization of 1.9 million members. These are informal women workers working in variety of sector. They are the world's largest trade union of informal workers, and they are unique because they are just not a trade union. They are also an association of cooperatives and social enterprises that are owned, run, and managed by informal women working in the informal economy. So let's hear from Rima Ben. Sebastian, can you play the video? She's not able to join because it's too late. Otherwise, she would have joined. It's like past midnight there. So let's hear from Rima Nanavati. So I don't know if it's me. I can't hear the voice. Sebastian.
Namaste, and a very good day to all of you. We all have been living in very unusual times. The world has become turbulent. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting lockdown has been very disruptive for the informal sector workers' work and income. A study conducted by SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, showed that 71% of the informal sector workers had lost their livelihood completely. Some 63% survived only on one meal a day, and 73% would starve if the situation continues in a similar way longer. Almost 43% of the children of these informal sector workers who had just started going to school will have to be dropped out of school, and the worst affected amongst them would be the girls. This has been the reality of the informal sector workers because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related lockdowns. For the urban informal sector workers, social distancing, quarantine has been very difficult. Maintaining hygiene, sanitation is even more difficult for the urban informal sector workers. In spite of all this, I'm very happy to share that the informal sector workers and their union have quickly adapted to digital organizing, using digital modes, digital technologies and applications for organizing, membership renewal, for education and awareness related to COVID-19, but also to e-training and virtual modes of learning and education. We also have the opportunities of initiating new enterprises of the informal sector workers. The vegetable vendors and the vegetable growers, the members in the rural areas, were linked together, and they have now an enterprise where the vegetable vendors no longer have to sell sitting on the streets, but they ride electric rickshaws and do home deliveries of vegetables and fruits. Likewise, the agribusiness initiative also was in big demand. I would like to emphasize here that informal sector workers, therefore, are not a liability, but they help in building a nation's economy. They are human capital, which needs to be shared and enabled to build their capacity. Therefore, I would strongly like to emphasize here that in spite of relief for the informal sector workers, what is needed is a universal social protection. There is a need for a minimum basic income of up to rupees 15,000 per month for the informal sector workers. There is also a need to build resilience of these informal sector workers' livelihoods and their very tiny enterprises, and therefore a need to set up a livelihood recovery fund so that the flow of capital also follows labor standards. It helps in building the resilience of the informal sector workers. I would also like to mention that there is a need to guarantee employment of a minimum number of 200 days for the informal sector workers, and the governments need to have policies that ensure this. I hope that ITUC, the Global Commission on Future of Work, and ILO together will look at these needs that have emerged and have been thrown out because of the pandemic of COVID-19. The future of work no longer is for the future, but has now become reality. We need to fast track. Thank you.
Beaucoup. Thank you so much, Rima, for those words. We thank you, Yogesh, as well for your remarks earlier. And this is en ce moment, nous avons une dizaine de
At
minutes.
this time, we have 10 minutes left to commit to engage in discussion with our panelists. So I invite you to ask your questions in the chat. And Miriam, Yogesh, and myself, I'll start with a question. Actually, our first question for Miriam. Miriam, you said that something that really hit me, as you said. You talked about politicizing solidarity, to put that solidarity at the heart of politics. And I think that in the two interventions from Yogesh and yours, that there is a main element, which is the role of the women, the role of women in the convergence of struggles. I'd like to hear you say more how your is experienced in Brazil in respect to the changes that are in Brazil at this time. How do you see this element of solidarity, the role that women are now playing to create these changes? First, when we had the military dictatorship, when we had when we stopped working, when we had strikes, we had solidarity to keep on this strikes and grève in French, yeah, to to see how we could resist for a month. Could we resent of the not paying the salaries? We organized ourselves as women in order to ensure the food for the workers' families. I even started that way in my city. We were organizing Amar. It's like love. It's a support for organized women, and so we prepared our meals. We distributed this. We went from house to house to find out what were the conditions of people. We had communication in the companies and their families because a lot of things are closing down right now. The social movements in Brazil, for the unions, for example, people who work in petroleum industry, in the Petrobras, and the cost has gone up enormously. The gas used to be used for the kitchen, and so they're selling gas at subsidized costs. Now, I personally, I was already working at the international level when I left the women's group. I tried to look at specifically what I could do in Sao Paulo, and where many Cambola communities live. These are communities of black people who have extract themselves from slavery and who developed nature in communities. So I work with these women, and there is, I think, 3 or 4 years, we organized an alliance with a consumer group in Sao Paulo or another place around Sao Paulo to buy directly the food. But the idea we had, first of all, is to sell. That wasn't the idea. The selling wasn't the most important thing. It really was to work with women and the communities and to recognize the contribution of women in the gardens, for example, in the production they have for consumers, but also in with money changes, how they support their families that are live the families that are in the city. So we shouldn't insist on sales, but to see what was the economic contribution of women, either for the sustenance of the family, and therefore to show that there's a whole non-monetary community that helps life. And another thing idea we had that would fit in with the consumers here is to change the relationship between the urban and the rural situation. There's this whole idea that the urban is modern, that's where it's most interesting, that we have to go towards the cities and see what the consumers in the cities want to eat and production. And so we don't want that anymore, because really the farmers try to produce what the consumers in the city want. And so we had to work on this ourselves. We had to we needed more fertilizer and things that comes from outside of the production unit. So we really wanted to change those relationships of power, and we in the city, we are learning how to deal with these things, and so it's a way of recuperating a memory and emotional, even of people in the city, of things that they used to eat before. So this experience that has increased during the pandemic because the network in the city has increased. There are collectives that were formed to ensure through gifts the access to food for the more vulnerable populations. That's an example. And so women doubled their production surface, and the income increased 3 times. So that's an idea simply I wanted to express quickly. The question of feeding and the alliance around feeding is a very important issue, but it's not, can say, it's not any kind of food. It's a healthy food, ecological, that comes from the knowledge that people have in the field. It's a long answer, but I think it's clear. No, that was very wealthy, very rich, I should say.
Note with Yogesh, because I feel that it links a little bit with what Yogesh mentioned earlier about innovation, finding innovative solutions. And so Yogesh, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your vision, where you're seeing in the work that you're doing about the role of women in the digital divide. You talk a lot about the digital divide, but it looks like there is a need to close the gap, not only between rural and urban, but also the intergenerational and the access gap. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the role of women in that effort to close that gap. You're muted.
Always one thing we have learned in this pandemic. Make sure that you're not muted. Yes, yeah, I think first of all, innovation is not invention, and innovation can be a process. Innovation can be in new partnership. Innovation can be in terms of applying an old product or a service in a new configuration. And also innovation in the context of what Rima Ben was talking about, informal economy. Innovation can be an ongoing process, or innovation can be a luxury here, but in the life of an informal worker, they have to innovate on a regular basis, on a continuous basis, in order to survive. They innovate every day. If you're selling on the roadside informally, you have to innovate every day how to protect yourself from the authorities, so that they don't come and confiscate your product. So innovation is a part of livelihood. I think when I say innovation in the in the digital economy. I think there is a lot that can be done there. So, for example, here we all use, now we are so dependent on the technology. We use so many apps to access so many things here. Now, how the same can be used, how some of these apps can be used to provide some of the basic services of access to water, access to education, access to health. Miriam was talking about access to healthy food. Let me tell you what happened during this pandemic. So there were these lockdowns in the areas where Seva is working, and the smallholder farmers, they had their produce ready to be harvested. Now the main market yards were closed, the roads were closed, and but the sale of essential commodities was allowed, but there was no transportation available. So the only market available was local market. Now, Seva, what they started to do is they started to take orders on WhatsApp. Now you can get a WhatsApp order, and then if you take the order by 6 p.m. in the evening, then you would deliver by 8 a.m. in the morning. But in WhatsApp you can't collect payment. Their orders are misplaced. Sometimes you deliver, sometimes you're not able to deliver. Now, how difficult it is to create an app which can actually, like a mini Amazon, that those women can use to organize their local activity, because there was a lot of market created during the pandemic where they were actually selling the local product to the local consumers, and there were a lot of demand for a healthy food that was available locally and has less impact on the environment as well. And there were a lot of reduction in the waste as well, because in fresh produce there's a lot of material that is wasted when it reaches to the market. So a lot of benefit of localizing the economic activity, and that's where the technology can play a role as well. So there's a lot of application, and making sure that the key barrier, for example, a rural household or a woman will have in access to technology. So how do you actually look at the technology from the inside the perspective of a woman? What would make her access the technology and realize her potential? So that's what I think, that's where the innovation needs to happen, and not necessarily inventing a new product for her, just the contribution and reducing her barriers and access.
Thank you so much for that answer. It's so insightful. Merci beaucoup, Miriam. Merci beaucoup, Yogesh, for those great contributions. Andréane, la parole est à toi.
Merci beaucoup, Eddie. Merci à Myriam, Yogesh et Rima. Je sais que c'est rapide, on pourrait continuer.
I know this is fast. We could pursue the conversation a long time, but we soon have to close soon. Before closing, I want to pass the microphone to Michel Asselin to say a few words for two main reasons. First of all, because I know that Lacosi has worked a lot on the question of justice, feminist justice, climate justice, and she's worked a lot and on this, and also because you maybe don't know, but this conference here was supposed to be held in Montreal. We were supposed to be face to face in Montreal. Lacosi was going to be the host partner of this event. So I thought it was very important to invite Michel, the executive director of the Association Québécoise des Organismes de Coopération Internationale, Lacosi, to say a few words. Michel, the floor is yours. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy. Actually, it's an honor for me to conclude this week, a very rich week, where there were exchanges that fed us, that fed our reflection, and very strongly. What we're now facing a nightmare, the word used by Miriam, which she intervened, and she's right. This pandemic is a nightmare for a lot of people who are on this earth and what we're doing to the earth. But we know other nightmares, other challenges, collective challenges, these climate changes question us and impact the future of our planet. And so we have to look at this as women, in a feminist way. And it's very interesting to hear this last panel where our two guests have contributed the feminist look on world. And first of all, we talk about a transition, but we say that we don't want to come back to know what is normal, because what was normal before the pandemic was also a source of inequality, of injustice, of major issues, of non-respect of the human rights or women's rights. So we want to commit ourselves in a transformation of the world. And so we need to base ourselves on the knowledge, on the experience of peoples and communities that are resilient and resistant. I like the expression resistance and resilience that can form one single word, which qualifies the experience of the black people and the native people in Brazil. But I think that's the same experience of the informal economy in India. I think that this knowledge, this accumulated memory that these women have taught, have learned. We need to share this and build new knowledge to transform our world. This is what our two speakers, panelists, invited us and inspired us to think about. We have to build a resilience in respect to the pandemic, but also in terms of the climate changes, in respect to the capitalistic economy that produces always more inequalities. And this resilience, we will build it together in order to build another world after this pandemic, and in respect to the major issues of this century. Possibilities? There's the new technologies, the new digital technologies. They can support the women of the informal sector. We've seen this to act by basing ourselves on our human capital to see how we can together find solutions. Miriam told us, be careful, there are solutions, but there's not only one solution. And there won't be tons of them either. We need to work together in a perspective of convergence of our struggles from north to south, from south to south, from north to north, together, and in a perspective of intergenerational perspective. So those are a few comments, ideas that need to be pursued, I think. And as a Quebec Association of International Cooperation, we are active members of this network, of this pan-Canadian work, of the ICN, the Inter-Canadian Network. So this is one meeting now. There will be another one this fall, maybe. We hope this fall, face to face, where we're going to invite you to reflect together on the issues of how can we knock out the wars that go against the rights of women, human rights, and that we need to break what is happening to the environment and peace. So I give you a rendezvous. We're going to work with the Spur team to prepare another conference as soon as possible, face to face if possible. If it's not in the fall 21, it'll be the beginning of 2022. Thank you very much. Thank you particularly to all the people of the Spur team, and I wish you a happy ending of the day.